If you think the dollar is untouchable and that the United States still dictates the world's financial rules, I have bad news for you. The collapse of the system has already begun, and the blow was delivered quietly. No salvos, no cameras, just one phone call in Beijing, and that was enough to send a chill through Washington. On April 7th, 2025, a short phrase was spoken in Beijing: "Stop buying dollars." It wasn't a discussion, not a consultation. It was an order, issued by the Central Bank of China to all state-owned banks: the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, ICBC, the Bank of China, and the Agricultural Bank. Cease any operations that increase dollar exposure. Switch to the yuan immediately. Silence is the primary tool of power in Eastern diplomacy. No press conference, no statements, only action. And on the same day, the yield on 10-year U.S. Treasury bonds spiked to 4.81%, a level we haven't seen since the crisis of 2007. And this is where things get really interesting. You think this is just another move in a trade war? Are you sure you even understand what game you're playing? Because if you still see this as a trade dispute, you're already 5 steps behind. China is not merely rejecting the dollar. It is building an alternative global payment system in real time. And it's doing it without grand slogans or declarations, just through actions. According to Reuters, in March, Beijing sold off $24.1 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds, the largest monthly decline since 2018. But the real threat isn't in the volume. The real threat is the precedent. If China is doing this, who's next? 2 days later, on April 9th, Spain signed its largest investment agreement in 20 years with China, ignoring both Washington and Brussels. The deal includes preferential treatment for Chinese companies in logistics, green energy, R&D, and the creation of industrial hubs in Valencia, Bilbao, and Algeciras. Why is this critical? Because just 48 hours earlier, Trump had imposed 100% tariffs on electric vehicles from Europe, accusing Chinese subsidies of undermining fair competition via the EU. Spanish authorities couldn't withstand the dual pressure. On one side, U.S. tariffs; on the other, the lure of Chinese investment. They chose Beijing, and this is no longer about economics. This is geopolitics. This is a tectonic shift, where once European countries automatically followed the U.S. lead, now more and more decisions are being made based on profit, not allied loyalty. As a result, against the backdrop of statements about a pause in the trade war, the flow of Chinese goods to global South countries increased by 42.6% compared to the previous year, especially toward countries that formally support the United States. Mexico by 18.3%, Spain by 21.9%. Do you know what that means? Tariffs didn't stop Chinese goods. They simply changed their route. Products are being relabeled in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Mexico, and imported into the United States under a different flag. In essence, America is paying more, receiving the same goods, while Chinese logistics are the ones benefiting. How much longer can American consumers afford to pay for this spectacle? And here comes another blow. On April 3rd, BYD, China's largest electric vehicle manufacturer, announced the construction of a massive hub in Valencia. Investment, 10 billion euros. The plan is to produce up to 800,000 vehicles per year by the year 2028, build a gigafactory for batteries, and a port for exports to North Africa and the Middle East. This is BYD's largest overseas investment, but it also signifies something else. China is building a platform for dominance in the global green economy, right in Europe. Meanwhile, despite supporting U.S. sanctions, Chinese electronics imports into the European Union rose by 16.4% in the first quarter of 2025. Australia, despite its alliance agreements with the United States, increased lithium exports to China by 21.7%. Japan, a loyal American partner, increased purchases of Chinese semiconductors by 11.2%. Did you notice? The words say one thing, the actions, something entirely different. The United States has announced a blacklist of 12 more Chinese companies, including battery giant TTL and the semi-state chip maker SMEK. But here's one detail. Through BlackRock, Vanguard, and Fidelity funds, more than $412 billion in American pension savings have already been invested in Chinese stocks. In other words, by attacking Chinese companies, America is simultaneously hitting its own retirees. This is not a symbol. This is a trap. In January, the addition of Hikvision to the blacklist triggered an outflow of funds totaling $3.7 billion. Something similar is happening now. JP Morgan is recording a sharp increase in pressure on global funds. The SEC, in its internal report, has already acknowledged that an accelerated decoupling of the Chinese and American economies could trigger a financial crisis through passive channels. At the same time, inflation in the United States is not slowing down. In March, it reached 4.3%. Real incomes of Americans are decreasing. The average American is losing purchasing power and paying more and more for electronics, auto parts, and household appliances. Small businesses are complaining about rising production costs. Almost one-third named tariffs as the main problem. A year ago, only 8% did. Manufacturing indices are falling. The ISM index stands at 47.2. This is lower than any level since the pandemic. And this is not just a signal of a downturn, it signals the approach of stagflation, the very scenario that Americans fear like the plague. But if inflation continues to rise, production falls, and wages stagnate, how long can social peace in America hold? In the first quarter of 2025, foreign holders sold $138 billion worth of U.S. bonds. China, $31.6 billion. Japan, $23.4 billion. Saudi Arabia, $11.9 billion. This is not a rebalancing. This is an exodus. The yield on 10-year bonds reached 4.89% by April 10th. This raises mortgage rates, loan interest, and increases the cost of servicing the national debt. According to calculations by the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, each additional percentage point in yield means an increase of $2.2 trillion in national debt over 10 years. The question is, if China and Japan no longer want to finance America's deficit, who will? And how will this end? America can shout louder. It can introduce new blacklists. It can try to intimidate its allies. But if allies say one thing and do another, that's no longer an alliance. That's the end of the illusion. And so, one phone call in Beijing marked the beginning of the largest shift in global economic power in the past 30 years. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and I will continue to follow the developments. Things are only going to get tougher from here.